You're listening to the Critical Hour on Radio Sputnik. I'm Wilmer Leon, joined here by my co-host, Garland Nixon.
Thank you, Wilmer.
Asia Times reports China unveils new supercomputer but skips parameters. Commentators say Beijing wants to stay low profile while launching its supercomputers to avoid more U.S. curbs. For insight into this, let's turn to our next guest. He holds the John Jay and Rebecca Moores Chair of History and African American Studies at the University of Houston. He's one of the most prolific writers of our time. His latest book is entitled Revolting Capital, Racism and Radicalism in Washington, D.C., 1900 to 2000. Dr. Gerald Horne, as always, welcome back.
Thank you for inviting me.
So a Chinese supercomputer that uses domestic chips and computing architecture has been unveiled in Guangzhou, but its operator refused to disclose the machine's performance parameters. This supercomputer has recently commenced operation. The National Supercomputing Center said at the 2023 Supercomputing Innovation Applications Conference on December 6th. Dr. Horne, this speaks volumes to me about a number of things. One is it's more evidence of the adage, necessity is the mother of invention. It also demonstrates what the inverse relationship, we'll say, between sanctions and progress, because China just keeps saying, well, if you want to sanction me, fine, we'll find ways around your sanctions, and the results you really will not like. Dr. Gerald Horne.
Well, one of the many contradictions of the U.S. sanctions regime, which is why, in a sense, they keep backfiring, is because in some ways they're at odds with stated U.S. imperialist ideology. That is to say that imperialist ideology suggests that governments should stay out of the marketplace. As Mr. Reagan, the late U.S. president, once said, government is the problem. But with sanctions, you see that the government, that is to say Washington and its sidekick in Brussels, the European Union, seek to shape the marketplace. And obviously that has not worked. I mean, to give you one data point amongst many, if you look at the trade statistics of Kyrgyzstan, a former Soviet republic, since 2022, their trade with Germany, particularly in autos and auto parts, has expanded by 5,000%. Now, it's not as if there is a boom in Kyrgyzstan. Obviously, what's happening is that Russian entities are trading indirectly with Germany through Kyrgyzstan. But the story that's now on the table is highly significant because it's an aspect of a larger narrative that we need to contemplate more seriously. That is to say, the rise of China in the 21st century, perhaps the most important development in the world or in the political economy in the last 2 centuries, or perhaps the last 5 centuries. You see this not only with regard to quantum computing, and by the way, CBS's 60 Minutes did a story on this just a few days ago, where they portrayed IBM of the United States as being the pioneer without a nod or a glance at China, which meant that they were misleading their vast audience. But China is also leading the planet with regard to green energy, even of more importance in light of the climate summit recently concluded, where there's going to be a supposed phase down or phase out of fossil fuels, which in some ways means that the world will then have to turn to China for technology concerning green energy. And of course, they're also a leader with regard to electric vehicles. Even Tesla of the United States manufactures heavily on the Chinese mainland, not to mention the fact that Warren Buffett, one of the 5 most richest individuals in the United States, the Oracle of Omaha, as he is dubbed, has invested heavily in BYD, which is the Chinese EV leader. Now, what's also remarkable is that there is a distinct possibility that China will lead the world with regard to artificial intelligence. Now, I'm sure your audience has been following these stories suggesting that if we're not careful, artificial intelligence is going to take over the world and force we humans to be android slaves. Whether or not that's true, the fact is that in some ways, China is ahead of Microsoft and Google in terms of this technology. And keep in mind that the late war criminal Henry Kissinger, one of the last books that he helped to author, or actually co-author, because he co-authored it with Eric Schmidt, formerly of Google, was precisely on this question of artificial intelligence, because there's this notion afloat that whatever country leads in artificial intelligence will somehow be the leader of this small planet. And of course, China is also a world leader in terms of rare earths, which are important for electric vehicles and quantum computing alike. And so the United States is apparently contemplating tightening trade restrictions with regard to China, particularly in this area of chips that go into these supercomputers. What's remarkable there is that if you look at the leading U.S. producers of chips, particularly NVIDIA of California and AMD of California, both are now led by Chinese American scientists. And that bespeaks the fact that because of this relationship with the People's Republic of China going back a few decades, China has sent a number of the flower of its youth to be educated in the United States of America. Some of them have returned, some of them have not. But even there, the United States has a very striking dependency. And so we see, going back to this trope of the most important developments of the past 500 years, this should not be surprising what's happening today, because by a certain calculation, 1,800 out of the past 2,000 years, China has been the world leader. After all, China was a pioneer in developing both gunpowder and paper. And then before it suffered the century of humiliation beginning in 1849, China was a leader then as well. And of course, the century of humiliation was ignited by the British Empire, not least because of the so-called Opium Wars, where they were trying to force China to accept drugs so that their population could be catatonic, so to speak. And so we see that the world is returning to where it once was. But I would be remiss if I failed to mention that a turning point in terms of the rise of China was precisely Dr. Kissinger and U.S. imperialism, which a half century ago brokered an anti-Soviet entente with China. And as a return, China received massive direct foreign investment from the United States of America. And that has led now to this crisis for U.S. imperialism, which is being exacerbated by the geopolitical crisis, which you've made reference to more than once in recent days and weeks, and including today. That is to say, how the Palestinian crisis is worsening the image, the already declining image of U.S. imperialism. You might have noted that U.S. corporations such as Starbucks, that is to say, those that face consumers, their stock is going through the basement because there are boycotts in West Asia and North Africa with regard to Starbucks. And that's one of the reasons why you see these comments from President Biden trying to put some distance between himself and Prime Minister Netanyahu, but I'm afraid to say that it's too late. I think we've mentioned before the rather striking video from a McDonald's in Istanbul, where a pro-Palestinian protester enters that store and unleashes mice, sending customers scurrying hither and yon. So this crisis of U.S. imperialism can only be worsened in coming days, months, and weeks. The miscues and misdeeds of U.S. imperialism have contributed precisely to the rise of the People's Republic of China.
South China Morning Post reports Seoul urged to keep inter-Korean military pact as tensions soar. It's a safety pin for peace. We got about 2 minutes, Dr. Horne.
Well, South Korea is in a real crisis right now. They have a conservative leader, President Yoon. The conservatives historically lean more towards U.S. imperialism, but China is their major trading partner. At the same time, this suggests that President Yoon will not fare well at the next election. Likewise, the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, North Korea, right across the border, has been developing various kinds of technology that has the conservatives quite shaken right now. And so we can see that also with the Palestinian crisis, you see both Korea and Japan, South Korea and Japan, trying to reassure their resource trading partner in predominantly Islamic Indonesia, predominantly Islamic Malaysia, that they will not side with U.S. imperialism with regard to Israel. And of course, reference here the striking vote at the General Assembly just the other day, where only the United States and about 9 or 10 other nations, including nations like Micronesia and Liberia, stood with Washington, where even close allies, so-called, like Australia, France, etc., either voted against the United States and Israel or abstained.
And just quickly, in 30 seconds, there was a time I remember we were during the Trump administration, there was talk about détente between the North and the South Koreans, and that there could be some amicable discussions, and now all of that seems to have just disappeared. 30 seconds.
Well, sure, because I think that the problem is that the Biden administration has overestimated the strength of U.S. imperialism. And so, therefore, it does not necessarily see a rationale or a reason to cut deals. For example, cutting deals with North Korea. For example, cutting deals with Russia with regard to Ukraine. So that's the problem.
Dr. Gerald Horne, as always, thank you so much for your time. Greatly appreciate that analysis, and we look forward to having you back.
Thank you.